Tell me a bit about the story behind how you moved to Key West.
Well, I was in New York as a young man and started buying and selling movies in Europe and realized I could do it on the phone. And it was so overwhelming physically to be in the city. I said, I have to drop out. I need an escape. Or I need to buy time. And like so many, this was the Vietnam era. I wanted to just drop out, but I couldn't leave America, so I looked on the map and saw this little dot at the end. I said, hey, that looks like it. Does it have a road there or not? Hey, I'll try it. So I bought a one-way ticket from New York to Key West and flew down knowing nothing and nobody. I said, I need 2 weeks. I need 2 months to just get, we grew into 20 years, 30 years. But the Key West has always been a haven. And they say that the sea will give you solace when you can't find solace anywhere else.
How did you get into the movie business?
Well, I went to college. I got a scholarship. I was going to be an international diplomat. Я говорю по-русски. I studied many languages. I traveled to Turkey and Greece, retreading the route of Alexander the Great.
Oh,
It was
okay.
very romantic, and I wanted to re-follow that route.
Right.
He was born in Macedonia, and Thessaloniki, and Philippi, and then he went. So I went to Crete, and I went to Turkey, and I traveled through Asia and the Middle East when I was in my 20s, and then I came back to America, and this was such heavy. It was the middle of Vietnam. In Greece, everyone was dancing at night, and they had no money, and here's a 2,000-year-old culture, so the joy, you'd eat a tomato, and my God, the first real tomato I ever ate was in Greece. So I went to New York. I was the only young person there who was not being supported by their parents or going to school or smuggling dope to make a living. I was the only 20-year-old really on his own in Manhattan. It
Wow.
was brutal because intellectually I was offered the vice presidency of Paramount Pictures as a young man, and I had always been interested in movies. When I was a teenager, I read Great Gatsby, and I said, I'm going to make this into a film script as an experiment. So I wrote one chapter into a film scenario. And then lo and behold, I hear they're making a movie, Great Gatsby.
Ah,
So I called the director, who's a big English director, and wrote him as a, really an 18-year-old. I wrote the screenplay, and he says, thank you very much, but we already have our screen scenario. So when I went to New York, I started meeting film people, and I realized the key was to raise money for movies or buy films. There was a tax write-off of 10 to 1 at that time in the 70s. So I started buying films from Europe, in Germany and Italy, and selling them for tax shelter purposes to distributors and investors in the States. And I was doing quite well at that, but I realized I'm buying them over the phone and selling them over the phone, and I couldn't stand the being in the city anymore. I wanted nature. So I realized I can go anywhere I want in the States and still do what I'm doing. And as I said, I opened the atlas, saw this dot called Key West. I had to get as far away as I could. I said, well, I'll book the one-way ticket to Key West. And that's how I came here.
wow. So now, since you've been here, you've been able to produce at least one film that had, Nev Campbell in it, right?
Yeah, right. That was the Lost Junction.
Okay, now tell me about how you produced that film.
Well, actually, I came to know the screenwriter who had written a screenplay on it called Lost Junction. And I introduced him to the director, Pete Masterson, who's a well-known director, and then to Michael Mailer, who's the second youngest son of Norman Mailer, who had a production company. And I helped put the financing together, and then we shot it in Canada. So my function was not a line producer, not on the so-called creative end, or not on site, but behind the scenes, packaging the project, getting a good story, a good idea, finding the financing, and overseeing that it would all work out right. So often you go to a movie, and even an average teenager say, I don't understand this, they spent $50 million on this movie, and the storyline doesn't even make sense, and they acting like telephoned it in. What's going on? Well, they're in it for the money, or for payback, or for an Oscar, but very rarely does it come together as an auteur with the artistry uppermost. And the challenge of media is you can, a movie, sitting, 200 people sitting in a darkened room for 2 hours together, being moved deeply, emotionally by the same sound and light, is an epiphany. That's the closest you're going to get to a religious experience in the secular West, where movies are magic. Even the hardest-nosed businessman, oh, I don't think the lights go down, he's sitting in his seat, and he says to himself, now take me away. I have just opened myself to the most ridiculous fantasy, just make me believe. And the truth is, you see people who are like you. They're human beings, except their mouth is 8 feet long, so they're bigger than life, and at the same time, they're human beings. So they become, like Campbell's, the archetype superheroes. Now, if you jump off a building, you'll fall to your death. But in a movie, you jump off, and you're Superman, you fly. But in our dream world, we do fly.
Yeah.
And teenagers, their minds are half in the fantasy world and half in the adult world. So, was that really true? You know, did this guy really do that? You know, it's like in Ragtime they say Mark Twain meets Freud, and they asked E.L. Doctorow, did that really happen? He said, well, now it has.
Yeah.
On other dimensions, they call it puppy love or fantasy world, but the other dimensions, which George Dorian is so good at bringing out, that's why 15 million people listen to him at night. It's not that they have more time at night, but that their minds are more susceptible to the dream world.
Right.
So I'm in the film business. I could have made billions doing horror movies or Terminator 7. If you have a movie, it, as I said, pings the collective unconscious of vulnerable teenagers and is more powerful than the madrasa, the president, their parents. Like Easy Rider can change an entire generation by the mythic fantasy which it implants in the young people's mind. It's more powerful than your teacher or your parents or, you know, your authority figures. And instinctively, young people know they're being lied to. They sense, because their body hurts, sit in a chair, learn this lesson. Now you're not in 7th grade anymore, you're an adult, you better buckle down because you want to be a class clown. You want to be a class clown? The few who say, yes, I'm a class clown, go on to make millions as a comic. But most say, no, ma'am, I don't want to be a class clown. So the so-called rite of passage to adulthood is to wring out your dreams, your fantasies, and be practical, which is the death knell. But movies can bring you back into that fantasy world where anything's possible. My interest is in creating films with a lot of very bright people that will inspire and liberate the minds of young people. Writing a book was the medium of the age in the 19th century, maybe even the early 20th. But now, you know, a hit book is read by 20,000, a flop movie is seen by 30 million.
Now, do your neighbors know that they're living next to a big film producer?
A legend in his own time?
Yeah.
Well, I've been in the Solaris Hill, that's a local paper.
Mm-hmm.
And Mark Howell can email you an overview of the many articles that have been. And I do hold big parties in the backyard on the water here. Mm-hmm. And I have interesting people. So, yes, some people know. And some people know there's certainly something different about this guy.
Well, yeah, you're obviously an unusual man.
Well, as I said, I'm a gregarious recluse.
Yeah.
The point is, I live for things that are, well, my epitaph for my tombstone was already engraved. It says, he refused to live for the American dream and lived happily ever after.